So here's what's going on. I'm going to pick a podcast here. I'm listening to one from PRI right here. I'm listening to Love on the Rocks. Okay? So as you can see, there you go. I've listened to about 27 minutes so far. I can go ahead and scroll the timeline back. There's 15 minutes. Scroll ahead. There's 39 minutes. Alright, so I can do all that, just like normal. Now, if I go out of here and go to another podcast, say this one right here from Pendant Productions. This is a Superman podcast. Okay, I've listened to this one for about 1:19. Listened to this one for about 10 seconds. So let's just go to this one. Okay, it shows that I have 20 minutes left in this podcast. Now remember, I'm still listening right now to the PRI podcast, and I forget what I was at, like 30 minutes or so, like that, somewhere around there. If I go ahead and use this scroll bar right here, this scroll bar starts controlling the PRI podcast. See, that's the PRI podcast. And believe me, I know, because I'm involved with the Superman podcast, so I know that's not in there. See, that's the PRI podcast. Yet, if you look at the numbers and the timeline, it's not advancing here, because this podcast, or this timeline, is supposed to be for the Superman podcast. But yet, it's controlling the PRI one. If I go all the way to the beginning, you can hear the guy say, it's, selected shorts, and it's a PRI. But now, check this out. If I leave here, alright, and I come back to that, it's back to 10 seconds again, because the 10 seconds is where I last left off with Superman, the last son of Krypton. So, this timeline is for Superman, but if you're listening to something and you move that around, suddenly this timeline becomes the timeline for what you're listening to. And that's confusing, because it says Superman up there, yet if I scroll through here, it becomes the PRI podcast. And the other thing is, this podcast is only 20 minutes long, okay? But if I scroll all the way through here to almost the very end, so there's only like a minute left, okay, there's a minute left of a 20-minute podcast right there. If I go back to the PRI one, now it's suddenly only 1 minute and 56 seconds left of an hour-long podcast. So despite, what page you're on, if the podcast, like that podcast, was only 20 minutes long, if you scroll to the end, it'll scroll to the end here on the one you're listening to, which is an hour long. So it's weird. It's like the timeline changes depending on what you're listening to, and that to me seems confusing. So anyway, there's that. This timeline, like I said, works fine if you're on the same page as that, and you can play and everything moves and all like that. The time disappears, goes away. But if you're listening and you go to another podcast, again, take a look. It's back at 10 seconds because I've only listened to 10 seconds of the Superman podcast. Yet I can go ahead and scroll and everything, and it won't affect this podcast at all. It affects the other podcast, and that's just weird. I don't know if maybe something can be added here to say now playing PRI, or the current listening thing, because seeing this timeline here, seeing the title up there, the show notes down here, makes me think this is all supposed to be the exact same thing. Or if I move this timeline, then maybe this timeline shouldn't affect the one that's playing. That's all I'm saying. Alright, so I hope that makes sense, because I tried writing this all out, and it just got so confusing, and I don't know, maybe this is even more confusing, but I don't know, something is weird with this timeline, how it changes like that. I hope this helps in some way, and I can make another one if you want further explanations. I don't know if that really explained what the problem was, because now even I'm confused again. It's very strange, It works fine here. I'm 26 minutes in. I leave, go to another podcast. Again, I've only listened to 10 seconds of that podcast, but look at, I've just moved about halfway through this 20-minute podcast, and if I go back to the PRI one, I'm about halfway through this hour podcast. It's just very odd. Very strange. So, oh, and look at that. It just jumped back. I didn't hit any button. It jumped from whatever it was, 34, I think, to 26. So it's at, let me see. So 26. Let's go back here. Go halfway through. Halfway through. So I should be halfway through the PRI one. Okay, so yeah, I'm halfway through. I'm at 28. But watch what happens if I hit pause. And then play again. It jumped back to 26. See that? I don't know why I did that. I didn't notice that before. So there's another little thing. So I don't know. Maybe, hopefully this will help you figure out what's going on. Okay? Oh, and before we go, I love the app. It's a great app. Just got this little bug going on there. So there you go.